Look, up in the sky. It's a plane.
It's a bird.
It's a frog.
A frog?
Underdog first took shape on my drawing board in 1963. For the very first pencil sketches, he looked very much the way he does today. Same baggy suit, the oversized cape, the same innocent expression. That expression only turned to righteous anger when Underdog was confronted with those who rob and plunder.
When Polly's in trouble, I am not slow. It's hip, 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 and away I go.
I modeled Sweet Polly Purebred, who was his leading lady, after Marilyn Monroe. I, like everybody else in the world, was in love with Marilyn Monroe at that time. I thought she was marvelous. So she has the white hair, the soft voice, the vulnerability.
Help! Help! Underdog!
We had Simon Bar Sinister, the evil scientific genius, and his voice was the voice of Lionel Barrymore. And if you've seen It's a Wonderful Life, you know how awful and nasty he was to poor James Stewart. And that's what I thought was wonderful for his character.
You may be here, but it's not going to do anybody any good. Because not even you can stand up against my new vacuum gun.
The voice of Riff Raff, he was modeled after George Raft. Probably not many people remember today, but in the 40s and 50s, he was one of the #1 gangster types, along with Edward G. Robinson and James Cagney.
Underdog did it to us again? But this time I got a plan that'll really fool him.
And he was that slick-haired, dark type, spoke in a monotone, very tough, always talked out of the side of his mouth. While none of them were direct caricatures of those people, they did provide the creative springboard I based the characters on. Underdog made his debut on NBC on Saturday morning, October 3rd, 1964. Wally Cox of Mr. Peepers fame was his voice. It was a match made in heaven. I mean, he just fit the character.
Excuse me, Sweet Polly, but I must go quickly and find Underdog.
We knew pretty much what the character profile was. Humble, lovable, Shoeshine Boy to begin with. And humble and lovable, that's Wally Cox. And then mild-mannered, heroic, but not aggressive. I mean, that was Underdog. And that also typifies Wally Cox. So his voice was the perfect match. The kids just loved him. They all knew his theme song and the phrase, "There's no need to fear."
Underdog is here.
Macy's loved him. I was asked to design an Underdog balloon for their annual Thanksgiving Day parade. Nobody at that time had a horizontal balloon. So I put him in a flying position with his arms outstretched to differentiate him from the other balloon characters who were all standing upright. I figured if he was prone, he'd take longer to pass a given spot and he'd get more airtime. Some years later, I was invited to a night before Thanksgiving party in Manhattan. Directly below me on 77th Street lay the sprawled out body of Underdog being inflated for the parade next morning. I excused myself and went outside and watched until he filled up and tugged on his ropes, ready to fly. I felt like a parent watching his kid graduate. Of all the shows I've worked on, Underdog was the character that the stars fell on. The press had a romance with him. He hit the cover of TV Guide. He hit the front page of the New York Daily News. He even grazed the stratosphere of Manhattan chic in 1966 by making the cover of the New Yorker magazine. He traveled around the world, appearing in Europe, in Asia, Australia, Latin America, and he was featured on t-shirts, kitchen glasses, comic books, games, toys, kids' sheets and pillowcases, toothbrushes, and everywhere the folks in merchandising could find a place to put him. A well-known British photographer, Patrick Ward, traveling around the United States, was compiling a pictorial essay of all the things that he felt represented the unique, whimsical side of the American spirit. He led off his article in the Smithsonian Magazine with a big picture of Underdog. 124 segments of Underdog had rolled off the studio lines in those years, in addition to over 400 segments of companion shows that spanned a full decade. King Leonardo, Klondike Kat, The Hunter, Tudor Turtle, Tennessee Tuxedo, Go-Go Gophers, Commander McBride. The actual production, the physical production, the inking and painting, the camera work, syncing sound, and production of the masters, that took place at Gamma Studios in Mexico City. There was no local source for regular animation cell paint, so they went to the nearby hardware store and bought house enamel and mixed up the right colors and brushed it right on the cells. I still had some cells up until a couple of years ago, and the paint on them was fresher in color and freer from checking or cracking than cells for commercial I'd produced in the States. Whatever voodoo they used down there to get the job done, it worked, because between us, for the whole 10 years of production, we never missed a network deadline. I'm convinced that there's a patron saint for fools and animators. Finally, in 1969, the kingdom of Zot shut its gates. Riff Raff smoked his last El Smello. Simon closed down his laboratory. Polly broadcast her last news release. And Underdog hung up his cape. And that brought to a close a very arduous but exciting and altogether extraordinary chapter of my life. And it was a heck of a ride. Over the past few years, Underdog has gradually matured into a beloved American icon. In 1997, World Hunger asked for Underdog to be their poster boy for their Hungerthon drive, following in the footsteps of Charlie Schultz's Peanuts and Gary Trudeau's Doonesbury in 1996, so Underdog wasn't in such bad company. In the fall of 1997, Animato magazine, which is a premier publication in the animation field, dedicated the bulk of their editorial content to Underdog. Underdog has been name-dropped on Seinfeld, on Friends, on Suddenly Susan, and shows where writers are perfectly comfortable putting him in their scripts with no introduction necessary. He's family now. One of the high points for me came on Rosie O'Donnell's show when she had Tom Hanks as a guest. For some reason, the conversation turned to cartoons and Underdog was mentioned. Tom lit up at that and declared that Underdog was his favorite cartoon as a kid. And then he spontaneously delivered the entire Underdog theme song word for word. I was so touched that I sent him a drawing and wrote him a note thanking him. And he wrote back, "America loves an underdog." Maybe it's just as simple as that.
When the world's in trouble, I am not slow. It's hip, 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 and away I go.
I'm happy to be speaking to you on behalf of Underdog and for the re-release of the classic episodes you'll find on this DVD. They're some of my all-time favorites. I hope you'll enjoy them. And don't forget, there's no need to fear. Underdog is here.